I'm Jeff Gedman with American Purpose. Welcome. Thanks to my friend and our colleague, Claude Weinberg, who's with us, who is helping and advising and helped create today's program. Claude, great to see you. And thank you for making time today. I want to thank...
if it works.
Now it works.
Only if it works. Well said, and it will. I want to thank Hannah Stein, who some of you were hearing from, who also is a longtime friend, who comes from Europe and lives in Riverdale in New York, in the Bronx. Hannah's wrote a fine piece for us yesterday, and I won't do it justice. We'll hear more from Hannah's later in this program. But if one of my colleagues, Robert or Michael, could post it in chat, you'll see why I will soon ask Hannes the question why a book author, public intellectual, and writer from Germany known as conservative, and writing for years and years for the conservative Die Welt, thinks that what Germany needs now is a green chancellor to lead the country forward in September. But more from Hannes soon. Franziska, it's great to see you. Welcome, and thanks for making time.
It's a pleasure.
And my brief introduction of you is the following. For those who do not know her, she's a dazzling politician in the landscape of German politics and within the German Green Party. She's studied early in her career in Paris and in New York at Columbia. She did a PhD at the University of Mannheim on UN reform. She's been involved in a range of issues, women's issues, foreign affairs, and she's been a member of the European Parliament. She's now a member of the German Bundestag, and we're eager to hear from you on a number of things, Franziska, including elections, future of German party politics, and the Greens. But I have a number of questions. I'm going to start very basic, you and I, for 20 minutes or so, and then we'll open up to the gallery. So first things first, if I have it right, you actually became a member of the German Green Party when you were a teenager, when you were 17 years old. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. Tell us a little bit about the party you joined and the party you belong to today. Has there been an evolution? And I gather you're still committed. Tell us a little bit why.
Yes, but before I tell you that, you have forgotten to in my introduction that we know each other for quite some time as well. And I had the honor to be part of the ASPEN Young Leaders program, the transatlantic one, I don't know, 20 years ago, and which I'm still grateful for because it gave me great exposure to American young people from, politics, economics, science, etc. So if I, allow me that second of being grateful to you, Jeff, for that opportunity at the time, and I'm still in touch with many of them.
Delighted, thank you.
Oh, it's a real, seriously. And I, I joined the Greens at the time. I was not necessarily an environmental activist only. I was fighting against, at the time, the nuclear test by Chirac. Some might remember, it's a long time ago. But I was mainly joining for women's rights, human rights issues. The German Green Party was created out of three movements: the environmental one, the feminist one, the human rights peace movement. And at that time, for me, I don't know if, it seems long ago, but it was 97, 98. And these were very important elections for me as a teenager because I had only known Helmut Kohl for the entire life that I was aware of politics. Helmut Kohl was the chancellor. And there was this feeling that Germany was sort of suffocating and not moving, and that we needed to change. And all of this came together and brought me to the Greens at the time. And maybe the strongest thought, and that sticks to me, or principle, is that, I don't want to live to the detriment of other people, be it in my generation, be it next generation, or be it other people on this planet. And I think that this is something that I still hold, and the idea of liberty, of, like being able to say what I want, to fight for it, and fighting for open borders. And in Europe, I grew up in a border region, and I still remember very well when the sort of when we didn't have to go through a border check between Germany and France. So all of this was the reunification of the continent, liberty, this hope that we could bring this to the enlarge it. That was the moment when I joined the Greens at that time, and they have evolved a lot. But I have to add that I'm from Baden-Württemberg. It's a state in Germany where the Greens have always been a bit peculiar compared to some of the other parts of Germany, and where we early on had the desire to really change reality, and not to criticize it, but really to change it. So for me, the involvement of our party has been one of myself as well, of reckoning that what compromises do mean in democracy, European compromises, international one, etc. So I'm still very proud of my party, and now that we are in government in Baden-Württemberg again with Winfried Kretschmann, and hopefully in fall in Germany.
Franziska, thank you. I'm going to move us a bit abruptly to foreign policy and then back to domestic policy and the elections. You wrote a piece last fall for Politico in which, well, the editors gave your piece the title, "It's Time to Move Past Pax Americana," but you advanced the argument that Europe needs to become far more self-reliant and less dependent on the United States, including for security. Now, about 3 months later, I read you in Die Zeit, being interviewed by a friend, Jörg Lau, I believe, where you were debating, as it were, with an American from, if you all know, the Quincy Institute. And here you were trying to strike a balance, arguing for European self-reliance, but against American exit or American departure, American withdrawal from the continent and security concerns. Could you speak to us a little bit off of those two articles, where you stand, how you see the right balance, and if you wish, how you expect this evolving under the Biden administration now?
Yeah, thanks for asking this question. And maybe to frame it, my view of the transatlantic relationship, of course, has been really formed by the fact that I was in New York on 9/11, and was in New York during that time and witnessed what it meant to the city, to my friends, and to the communities, and to the United States of America, to the West. And that has never left my understanding of what transatlantic solidarity stands for, and that it has been an attack on all of us, even if it seems now a bit far away. But for me, it's still something that has really changed, or not necessarily changed, but focused on my understanding of the transatlantic relationship. And I always understood that we as Europeans, if we want to be good partners of the US, we have to take over more burden of our own security. If we want to be now a good partner to Biden and allow him to have the domestic space to heal the country, which obviously you need it, independent of which side you're coming from, we can't put our security problems in our neighborhood on the American Washington, D.C. table. It's really, I see it as our responsibility. And being a good partner means taking over that responsibility. And for that, we as Europeans have to become more resilient, and we have to become more active in different spheres, be it energy, be it digital, be it, space, etc. And that's how I understand a good relationship. And at the same time, I would vehemently, and I did that in that interview with Wertheimer, I would oppose that the US withdraws from Europe or from the rest of the world. I think it would be a worse world. I can debate many policy decisions by American presidents, especially Trump, but I still believe that what we have seen in the Middle East is often, or in our neighborhood, and when the US has withdrawn, other actors come in. There is no such thing as a vacuum. And usually the actors coming in are those who are fighting against democracy. So in that sense, I'm I'm a pro-transatlantic European, and I hope that we Europeans get our act together sooner than later.
Franziska, in that very context, today, I think it's today, you had told me your co-party chairman is in Ukraine. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what's the purpose of that visit?
He met with Zelensky. He's meeting many figures in Ukraine. And, I think the importance of this visit is to show that we don't forget that conflict. We know that it is, even if it's a so-called frozen conflict, it's not frozen, it's going on. And that we have a responsibility for it as Europeans, not to let it be, go like all the other frozen conflicts, Georgia, etc. And he went to meet many actors from different spheres, from opposition, from media, etc., civil society actors. And I think it's good to show that, also in an election campaign, it's not just about us in Germany, but it's about our responsibility. And the après-Merkel, as we say, after Merkel, it will be a big shift. It will be a big change, not just for Germany, but for Europe and beyond. So I'm quite glad he went.
So I'm going to come back to après-Merkel in just a moment, but if we could stay on foreign policy for a moment, there are volatilities in Europe, and including as we speak in Belarus. And if you could give us some sense, your read of the situation, your read of the European debate and the German debate on what's happened and what kind of response that deserves.
It's outrageous. It's state terrorism. It's unbelievable it's just not acceptable. The idea that you have a person who receives asylum in one EU member state, flies from one EU member state to another EU member state, and is, taken out and taken to prison in Minsk. And I was quite happy that there was last night a quite, at least comprehensive package in general agreed by heads of state in the EU. And now, of course, we get to the nitty-gritty of adopting it and putting it into place. And I hope it will come soon and fast. I think, it's just not acceptable. If we accept that logic, nobody will be safe inside the EU. And we have to really track down the details. How was it possible that the KGB was in Athens? Why didn't they track that? There are many questions that I think we still have to get answers to, where we really as Europeans have to work together.
So thank you for that. And Franziska, I'd like to go back to domestic politics and what you described as the after Merkel, the après-Merkel moment and future. Could you tell us a little bit about the state of play in the German political party system? Because we know that the CDU and SPD have had troubles. I mean, let's call them the establishment parties. The Greens have benefited enormously. And then on left and right, you have rabble-rousers trying to push their way in, Die Linke on the left and AfD on the right. Talk to us a little bit about what you see unfolding in the next year or two in terms of a new government. You can't predict, but a new government, but also the stability of the political party system, where there's, like in many places across the West, there seems to be so much fluidity and instability.
No, I would agree that it's still too early to predict, but I think what is predictable and what we have seen in many other countries in the EU, by the way, is that you don't have the classical alliances of the past, of the 90s or the early 2000s, where you had, the conservative with the FDP, the Greens with the Social Democrats, etc. We as Greens, we do participate, or we have joined 6 governments in the EU. None of these 6 governments is a classical government of left or, just conservative. It's always a mix. And I think that this is what is sort of, the challenge, but also the opportunity, that each coalition obliges the actors to build bridges. And I think the difficulty will be not to just find the lowest common denominator, but to make something creative, good out of it. And I think that's the problem with the grand coalition as we have it today, the Conservative and the Social Democrats, is that they have not used that really to advance or give, the energy to our country that we need. There's so many more good ideas in our country. I find so many more, people with good ideas, scientists, companies, so many people out there who just want to advance Germany, and it's sort of, not possible. It's more paralyzed. And I think that will be the challenge in these new coalitions, however they will be, is to make sure we don't get to the lowest common denominator and just sort of struggle and manage to get through, but to really, I want to say liberate, but to set free all the energy that I see in our country.
Franziska, thank you. This is probably a good moment where I can turn to you, Hannah Stein. And if you've not read Hannah's yet in American Purpose, it's in chat, a piece called The Contender. And I want to start, Hannes, with you by asking, what is a good conservative author, writer, public intellectual like you, working for years for Die Welt? What in the world are you doing, people like Franziska and the German Green Party, including favoring a Green Chancellor in the fall? Can you explain yourself to us?
Well, first of all, can you understand me right if it's talk like that? Okay.
Yes.
So if you call me a conservative, I would like you to do it with the following qualifications. One of my closest friends he unfortunately passed away, a socialist kibbutznik. One of my closest friends, he's still alive, grew up as a devout, believing communist in a family of communists fighting the Nazis. His father died in Auschwitz. I have friends in Germany among all political parties, with the exception of the AfD and the Left Party. I also have, of course, friends in the Green Party. I would describe myself perhaps as conservative with a small c in the way in which I live. I mean, I'm a family guy, for example. So the reason why I wrote this article for you, Jeff, is I wanted to explain my right of center American friends that they should not make the mistake of thinking that the German Green Party is in any way like the American Green Party. We have an American Green Party. It's very small. It's a political sect. It's very much pro-Putin. The head of the party, whose last name is also Stein, no relation, keine Besproche. She was seen at the table with Vladimir Putin in 2015 or 16, together with Mike Flynn, right? So this American Green Party is a party which has not evolved since the 1970s or 80s. It remains stuck in its old ways. And what you've just been hearing from Franziska, that's not an outlier position within the German Green Party. I would say that's very much what people in the German Green Party now think like. And what is not to like? What is not to like about all of this? I mean, if there's one thing that I've been constantly in my life, it's a Cold Warrior. By the way, which also doesn't make me a conservative. Willy Brandt was a Cold Warrior. Many good socialists were anti-communists. 1984 was written by a believing socialist, George Orwell. Anyway, but what I've really always believed is that you have to defend liberty against authoritarianism. That is very much something the Green Party believes. What is not to like? The Greens are against Nord Stream 2. That's a pet peeve of mine. I would almost like to finish every article with, and furthermore, I believe that Nord Stream 2 needs to be cancelled. That pipeline with which Germany wants to get Russian gas, and which is an anti-Ukrainian thing. It's an anti-Polish thing also, by the way, to build that thing. The Green Party is against it. What's not to like? So I have one problem with the Green Party, which I don't want to gloss over, because it's a real thing where we have different opinions. I'm pro-nuclear power. Having thought hard and long about climate change, I'm pro-nuclear power. And that is something where the German Greens are still very much on the other side of the fence. But I believe it's a discussion worth having, and it's a discussion worth having with the Green Party. And let me just stop there.
Hannes, thank you. Now, before we open it up, Franziska, I want to give you a chance to reply, please.
Yeah, you know, Hannes, when you said liberty, for me, often in this crisis now, we had to take decisions that were not easy because you didn't have much time to think about it. And I always had a yardstick, im Zweifel für die Freiheit, in doubt in favor of liberty. And it's the yardstick of many of us in my party. And I think, you know, that this is, and I mentioned earlier on Winfried Kretschmann, who is the prime minister of my state, Baden-Württemberg. He's constantly citing Hannah Arendt and his understand, you know, like the freedom is the main reason for him to be in politics. And I think, you know, it's the same for me. If there's, you know, if there's one sense of making politics, it's to defend liberty and freedoms. And in that sense, I think that we are quite apart from many other Green parties, and we're far away from what many do want us to be, but that we are not. And I must say, there was an article now by Hans-Georg Maaßen, who is a candidate of the Conservative Party, who described us as the biggest danger for democracy in Germany, and put us in one pot together with the Davos and the international companies as being the socialists and communists that want to, you know, sort of destroy the German nation. And he's running for the German Bundestag for the Conservative Party. And I was like, what is conservative about this, about naming Davos to be the socialist main hub of, you know, making Germans servants of the international global elite? Yeah, and that's sort of, you know, sometimes for me, it's like I have positive connotations of being conservative. My father was conservative, the entire family of my father. And I think that this part in Germany is not conservative because it doesn't want to keep the status quo. It wants to go backwards. And this is why I wouldn't even qualify it as conservative. To the point of Nord Stream 2, by the way, if you allow me very briefly, we have been fighting against Nord Stream 2 for long. I've been fighting it out of European reasons, really, because in Poland, whoever you talk to, be it the Green Party, the Liberals, even, you know, the Peace, whoever, they were against it and asked Germany to stop it. And I could never understand how a German government just tells them it's not political, it's just energy. I always thought it was outrageous for a German government to take that as a stance to tell a Polish politician, whatever their political affiliation is, why do you bother us? It's not political. I thought it was arrogant, blatantly arrogant, and not European. And then there are many reasons, environmental ones, against it too. But this approach, I have been fighting against this for years now.
Okay, so Franziska, Hannes, thank you for that. And now we're at the midway point, and we have 25 minutes plus for questions and comments from the gallery. If you'd like to raise your hand or put your question in chat, please do so. And as I see people mulling, I'm going to take the liberty of calling on someone. Nick, can you hear me there? I see you have headphones on. Nick and I are part of a working group that focuses on a number of these issues, European transatlantic security. Nick, if you, gosh, my screen is up and down. There you are. Anyway, would you properly introduce yourself? Tell us something about your splendid publication. And if you be kind enough to offer a comment or pose a question. And thanks for being with us.
Oh, well, thank you for organizing this. So I'm Nick Gvosdev. My day job is with the U.S. Naval War College, but I also hold the editorship of Orbis, which is the journal run out of the Foreign Policy Research Institute. certainly always looking for comments and solicitations. And of course, Jeff and I are part of the Loisac group, which was set up a few years back to try to arrest the drift in U.S.-German relations, and by extension, the larger transatlantic relationship, at a time when everyone was saying, well, the transatlantic relationship is settled and we can move on to other things. And I think there's been people on both sides of the Atlantic, from 2015, 2016, saying we needed to keep talking and dialoguing about issues that were on the horizon. And with that, Franziska, thank you very much. This was a wonderful tour de force of and just really fitting in with so many of the topics that we're looking at. I wanted to get to probe a bit further about this idea of the post-Merkel environment, because I think this is really the question in the Loisac group. It's one that we've been wrestling with really from the beginning of the group, of what would be the contours of a post-Merkel future, and that is this a revival of transatlanticism? One of the things that has come up in Loisac group is that younger generations of Germans, whether on the right or on the left, are less transatlantic in their orientation. They think more about Europe as a distinct entity rather than a Euro-Atlantic community. What direction, as the Cold War and as Hannes pointed out, the reality, I just finished teaching history of the Cold War for Harvard Extension, and increasingly I have students that were not born prior to 1989 or 1991, for whom the Cold War is a distant historic memory. So if the transatlantic relationship is resting on the Cold War, period, then as we move into the 21st century, is it being replaced by something else where Germans and Europeans are saying, look, reaching back across the Atlantic is the most important connection for us?
Jeff, do you want me to answer? How do you want to do it?
Please, I turned the camera off because I was looking at someone in chat and their question. Patrick, I'm calling on you next. Franziska, please respond.
Yeah, thank you for that question. In terms of the next or those who are running for the chancellorship, Annalena, our candidate Baerbock, has lived a year in the US as a high school student. So she knows the US. She has been back many times. I have lived more than 2 years, almost 3 years in the US, have a master's from Columbia, lived in DC, have many friends in the US. So I wouldn't necessarily say that our generation, maybe the even younger ones that you're speaking about, to be in terms of those who are born in '94 or so. But I would really say that my generation, we have quite strong transatlantic ties. And programs such as those I mentioned earlier, like by Jeff, have also had their share in allowing these connections to happen, which I think, is always worthwhile. What I think the question is that most, I think, in my generation or the earlier one, have understood that Germany alone is not the right level of acting in this intercomplex and difficult world. Okay, so we know that we need to be part of a bigger entity. And, of course, that is for us the European Union. And I think that's the right level of defining your interests and giving you the capabilities to achieve them. And then the first partner of that, entity is the US. And the strongest partner. There's for me, no equivalence whatsoever with China or whatever. I hate those who put it as if there was an equidistance between the US and China. But that, having said that, it doesn't mean that EU interests must always equal US interests. And I think, this is the one side who's fighting this battle of saying, let's make you capable of acting, because in many areas we're not. And do that in a close partnership with the US, because most of the times our interests do align. And then you have those who go the other way around, who say, let's go back to a national level. Brexit inspired, whatever. Also sometimes frustrated with how slow the EU is to say, you know what, let's get rid of the EU. Our sovereignty is defined in the nation state. And then you have those who say, it's quite easy the way we have been as Germans. We do trade with everybody in this world. Americans take care of our security. Hasn't that been a wonderful time? And why should we ever change it? I'm convinced that this is over, and it's not an acceptable position, but it still exists. And it's a very convenient position of saying we make money with everybody. We do trade with China with no restrictions. And if the sea will be attacked and our ships can't go through, Big Uncle Sam will come and help. So these are a bit the positions and of my generation, I would say.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go to Patrick Chamorel and then Yuri, and then keep going down the gallery, the list. Patrick, you're next. I didn't read your question in chat, so pose it. However, in addition, I'm posing a question to you. German elections this year, French elections, if I have it right, next year. And I'd like to hear from Patrick, but also for Franziska. Is this a relationship that will show test and stress in the next couple of years, Paris, Berlin? But Patrick, over to you, and Patrick of Stanford and American Purpose Ed Board.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Franziska, for being so frank about these issues that you're addressing. One of them is security, and you said that you're in favor of more European autonomy in security, but the Green Party, of course, has embraced mostly a pacifist or anti-militaristic attitude that you can qualify, of course, but there is seemingly some kind of a contradiction between wanting more security, more European security, and the traditional position of the Greens on security in Germany. Can you enlighten us a little bit about your vision of a European security? And since Jeff mentioned, the Franco-German relationship, how would you reconcile, if you came to power in Germany, how would you reconcile your position on security with the French one, for example? Thank you.
Yeah, merci beaucoup pour ces questions.
Elle parle très bien français, oui.
Yeah, c'est presque ma langue maternelle. No, but I think the perception of us being a pacifist party was right when it was created, but it was already wrong when we governed the first time. Unlike those who have followed German politics, Joschka Fischer, the first intervention without a UN mandate, Kosovo, etc. So that was under Green foreign minister leadership. So, that was the latest point when our party was no longer a purely pacifist party. We have a skepticism towards the use of military force. Yes, we do really check much harder than maybe other forces in the German scene if and under what conditions the use of military force can lead to good and not to harm. And I think, that we take that challenge really serious and often do go to the ground, check it, are in touch with many people who are concerned. And then we often vote yes. For example, in the Bundestag, we have been in opposition for long, but we have been constantly voting in favor of mandates of the German Bundeswehr, being in the opposition. And like nobody would ever oblige us to vote in favor of it. There is a majority without us. And we do still vote in favor of military mandates. We don't vote in favor of all. And sometimes we change positions. For example, we have changed positions, but I was also in favor of that because I'm really highly skeptical of the EU mission, not the UN mission, but the EU mission in Mali. And when you see now what's happening, that the military has taken again, the transformation government, it's not a good development in Mali. And I don't think that we put enough political pressure on Bamako. So, we go really into detail, and on EUTM Mali, we do now abstain. We don't even vote against, but we really have doubts about the usefulness and effectiveness of that mission. And I think that, you know, we could go into a Mali debate now, but I think they're really, you know, reasoned and well argued. We still do vote in favor of the UN mission in Mali. So, you know, to that point of differentiation, we Greens in opposition do vote on these mandates. You were asking the question with the French. The interesting thing is, I think that what we do really share with Macron is the level of ambition for Europe. Not every, you know, policy decision, but the fundamental belief that if we don't get our act together now, we will pay a very high price for it later. And that we as Germans have to break some of our taboos. And one of them is, as I said, you know, we can trade with everybody, and, you know, the French soldiers or the American soldiers will help us. Also, by the way, and I think that is part of your question, is always, of course, the 2% NATO goal spending. And I put it on the table openly because I think it's a national goal. Each member state has to spend 2%, which in the objective of defining and creating joint capabilities as Europeans doesn't make no sense to me. Okay, so Greece is fulfilling it. It doesn't help European defense. You know, some member states are fulfilling it because of their pension funds for the soldiers are so high. So that's not my definition of security in the EU. So our German Green approach is to say, at the European level, by the way, together with our transatlantic partners, let's define the capabilities we need for the interventions we probably have to undertake or are undertaking. And then let's get them together. And that might cost less, more, or the same. We are open to wherever we end up, but we really want to go a different way. And I think that this would be better for European security. It would oblige us also to think much harder about our defense sector and consolidate the defense sector in Germany, which is a taboo, which is a problem when it comes to German-French cooperation projects, is that we in Germany have not consolidated the defense sector. It's a real problem. So, you know, these are difficult questions, but I wouldn't say that, you know, the current defense minister, Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, has almost killed FCAS for not putting enough emphasis, putting bad management there, etc. And I was really worried that it would be killed. I'm glad it's not dead. But if it had been, you know, killed, it would have not been the Greens, but the conservative leadership not putting enough attention to it and not being ready to consolidate the German defense sector.
So thank you both, Patrick and Franziska. Three colleagues whom I'd like to bring in, and then we'll see where we are. Time is racing. We have 19 minutes left, hard stop 1 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to call on Yulia Zhozha, and then I'm going to call on Yang Chao. Did I pronounce your name correctly? Thank you. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then Peter Skerry. And if each of you would say a word about you and your work, and Yulia, over to you.
Thank you, Jeff. And thank you, Franziska. It's a pleasure listening to you. My background is that I'm Romanian, but I grew up in Germany and Romania, Baden-Württemberg including. But my job is to look at Eastern European security. And so this is kind of where I want to head with a question. When two years ago, I was living in...
Before you ask your question, would you tell us where you work now and what you're doing? Sorry to interrupt.
Sure, of course. I am working as an adjunct professor teaching European security at Georgetown and a senior fellow for the Middle East Institute looking at Black Sea security. And I just stepped, sorry for being late, from a briefing that I was providing at State on Black Sea security European responses. So this is kind of the corner from where I'm coming from. Now, the news of the German Green Party co-chairman in Ukraine is fantastic news and surprising news from my side. But the question that I have for you is, if we are to hope for, or we do hope, but if we are to see the Greens in power following the elections, what will be the stance, or are there going to be significant changes on Eastern Europe? Why I'm asking this question particularly is because we're looking at a bunch of things. We mentioned Nord Stream 2, the Germany, longstanding ally of the United States, under sanctions for undermining Eastern European security. We see Germany as the maker and breaker of Eastern European security from a European perspective. But from an Eastern European perspective, there's also a lack of trust. Eastern Europeans do not trust Germans with their security for good reasons, I would argue. I remember two instances. One was being still in Berlin, not being able to stay in Berlin, moving to DC because there was an interest in Eastern Europe in Germany, specifically if it isn't Russia. I remember being on a panel by Die Zeit that was called Eastern European Second-Class Citizens, where the Polish ambassador refused to participate. And I also see now the discussions between AKK and Heiko Maas on lethal weapons. So human rights aside, Eastern European focus, is there going to be a significant change when it comes to the Green Party potentially in power in September, when it comes to embracing more European security, more Eastern European security? Is that going to be specifically away from human rights on the military, specifically a change of position? And also when it comes to European security, last issue, as a strategy. We've seen after the enlargement a frustration from Eastern Europeans, Poles and Romanians, trying to change EU strategy 10 years after the first one to include more of a stance and more of a threat perception of Russia and of Eastern Europe that has failed back then, with the new strategy focusing on the southern dimension. So with all these kind of asterisks in place, what do you think, or what is your assessment on these issues if the Greens are coming to power in September in Germany?
Yeah, thank you for the question. No, maybe to start off, you know that if you know the German debate, I always get angry when many other politicians do speak about Russia as our neighbor, and I always say it's not our neighbor. There are many countries that are our neighbors, like Poland, etc. But this speaking this way always makes me already angry, because it totally overlooks the countries in between, who really don't have good memories and don't like it if Berlin, Moscow are talking above their heads. And in that sense, I'm not sure if you were there at the beginning. I really said that my opposition to Nord Stream 2 comes from exactly that lack of understanding the concerns and interests of our Eastern neighbors. And it's not just Poland. You go all the Baltic countries, you go Scandinavia, it's really everybody surrounding us. And for me, it is important to take that as part of also solidarity within the EU. I have always been arguing that if we as Germans, we are asking in solidarity from the Eastern Europeans when it comes to refugees, etc. And I always said, but why would they, be in solidarity with us when on the one point that is important to them, we are not in solidarity? And I believe, sometimes going back, and I'm reading a fantastic book by Herrn Bitterlich, who used to be the European advisor to Helmut Kohl. It's quite interesting to read his memories of the time, and I think that this was the right approach of Helmut Kohl, that he said, if you do try to solve European issues in silos, you won't be able to solve them. And Helmut Kohl sort of brought things together and understood that it's a give and take, but everybody has to give. And I think that is sort of what has been lacking in the last years of German European policies, also to understand that sometimes, we also have to give. And I'm glad that during the COVID crisis now we managed to get the recovery fund, because that was for me, the nightmare we don't get there. So on the security, Nord Stream 2, we do really oppose it. We would totally withdraw political support for Nord Stream 2. We also have been in favor of the German participation in the Baltic states, etc., in NATO, etc. So we have been supporting this. We think that we have to fight much harder the cyber attacks that are coming, which in our opinion, we have been ignoring or sort of belittling for way too long. And where we are really concerned that we see now similar patterns in Poland as we have seen in the Baltic states, like ghostwriter attacks, etc. So, these are sort of concerns where we think we as Germans should invest much more in Eastern European security. Or when you see that, Czech countries or, Czech Republic, other countries are having their fights and we are not standing out in solidarity, this would change, where we would be much more in solidarity and in partnership. And maybe because you said, besides human rights, still we are tough on rule of law when it comes to the governments of these, mainly Hungary, but also Poland. And, I'm frank here, we would be tougher than the current government. And I think that it would be important also when it comes to Putin, not to have the Hungarian veto every single time. We have had it in the past. So, and I was very worried yesterday that Hungary would veto it last night, the measures because of Belarus. And we will still see in the implementation now over the next days and weeks if Hungary comes back with a veto. And that's a real problem, which is, one that is hard to address as long as we have unanimity in foreign affairs in the EU. That's why we want to move away from unanimity. But so far, that's a real concern.
So thank you, Julia and Franziska. Here's what I'd like to do, please. We have 10 minutes left. I'm going to take 2 questions together. That's not elegant, but the best I could do. We're going to take Yang Chao and Peter Skerry. If each of you would introduce yourselves, ask your question, and then after Franziska replies, Hannes, I'm coming back to you with a penultimate question, and we'll give Franziska the last word. So, floor is open, and Yang Chao, please tell us who you are and fire away.
Hello, I'm a philosophy professor at Kenyon College. I grew up in China. One of my best friends and classmates at the new school was Felix Esslin. So that's my connection with the German Green Party.
Well, no, wait a second. So you need to say, not everybody will recognize that name. Some will, but I think you ought to provide one sentence on that person just mentioned.
Okay, he is the son of Gongdu Esslin. He, I think, also ran for the German parliament as a Green Party candidate at some point. He went back to Germany. He never finished his PhD at the New School, but we were classmates. Yeah.
Okay, so this goes back to another era and strife. Okay, Professor, you have the floor. Sorry to interrupt you.
No problem. So I think Franziska has already been talking about how the German Green Party has been rethinking about taboos. So I think one of the taboos is its position against nuclear energy. So I've been actually trying to convince my friends at the Green Party Taiwan to change its view about nuclear energy. So I'd like to hear more from Franziska, the Green Party's arguments against nuclear energy. So I agree with Hannes there. Maybe I want to add one more additional reason why I hope the Green Party would rethink about that taboo. Because I think the German government's wind energy program has been very expensive and ineffective. So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. And hold the reply just for a moment while we get Peter Skerry in. And Peter, I'll let you introduce yourself and your question. You have the floor, Peter.
Okay. Hello. I'm Peter Skerry. I teach political science at Boston College. Franziska and I have many friends in common. I am particularly interested in migration issues and refugee issues. And Jeff and I in particular have spent a good deal of time in Eastern Germany, Dresden, Leipzig, where it's quite clear that a lot of Germans, but not just in the East, have been quite disaffected with migration patterns and the influx from outside, not unlike the way many Americans have been. And my sense of the issue, and I'm stand to be corrected, is that the German Greens haven't had much of a response to that sector of the disaffected part of the German population. And I'm wondering what Franziska's thoughts on that might be.
Okay, let me start with the question on nuclear energy. We have thought a lot about this, so it's not a reflex or ideological refusal. But as it stands, nuclear energy is not economically viable without huge state subvention, aid. It's just not, nobody today, no private actor will build you a nuclear power plant without massive support from the government financially. So under this condition, we don't think it's worthwhile in investing in technologies that you cannot extrapolate to the entire world in order to combat the climate crisis. And it's not because, it's dangerous, we don't know where to put the waste. Put all of this aside. We firmly believe that if we take German taxpayers' money now, that we need to invest it in technologies that will be able to be used across the entire world to replace coal, fossil fuels, etc. And we all know that uranium is a limited rare earth. So we cannot replicate it across the entire world. And then you get to plutonium, and I don't want this to be in the entire world. So for me and for us, it's a foreign affairs question, not to invest in the technology we know we don't want to have in everybody's hands. And that now in the next 10 years, we need to invest massively in the technologies we can use across the entire world. And that's our responsibility. And this is certainly not nuclear. And that's, why we're still against it. And it has, of course, we still have people who are opposing it because of all the risks, and I do share them. But, if you look at the world CO2 emissions, EU today, after today's worldwide emission, is 7%. Okay, so if the EU goes down to 0, we still have 93% of CO2 emissions worldwide. So whenever we think about what we do, the focus is on how can we help to get the other 93% down to. Because otherwise we do waste our money and we don't have the time to do this. I hope this helps as an explanation. And I think it fits sort of a foreign affairs round as well, because it's really, this is where I'm coming from. On the migration question, I wouldn't say that we haven't looked at that side. No, I have studied much also the reasons for the Brexit, why people voted in favor. Mm. There were so many studies, and there were big, studies that do take all studies and then do a meta study about it. And what I thought was quite interesting to see is that the pro-Brexit vote was always the strongest there where public institutions were cut down, where they had closed the local court and where they had closed the local library. The only factors across everything that did hold. And I think that this is part of what we have been fighting for over the last years, is to reopen public spaces and public goods for everybody and really make this possible to be an open public space for everybody. And I'm quite proud that we have not gone into what some now call in Germany identity politics, to go group by group, but of really saying we have to make sure that we do have public spaces where everybody meets without discrimination, wherever they come from. And that's what defines our democracy, and not single interest, but recreating this public space. And I think what we have done in Baden-Württemberg has been helping on this. Also redefining how we do add to the representative democracy a deliberative dimension, which we have, I think, successfully shown in Baden-Württemberg, and getting to talk to people that usually don't talk with us any longer, and bringing them back into the dialogue. And I personally, you know, when I do campaigns in Heidelberg, for example, we have the AfD, it's a far right party. And I always say, you know, I don't give any chance of them standing in a public space without a green standing next to it. I don't want a public space to be dominated by them. And we go where it's difficult for us. We go where we know that we're not, you know, celebrated immediately. And I think that this has been part of our success, but we have to become better. You know, Peter, we're not yet good enough. I very much agree with you. I was really worried, concerned that in the recent elections in Baden-Württemberg, among Labour, the highest vote went to the AfD. And I think that's unacceptable for democracy. So my challenge, my personal challenge for me is to make that a different result in Heidelberg in September. You know, we'll see if it works, but we have had, if I may, in Pforzheim, which last time during that election was with the AfD, we as Greens won at this time, the same in Mannheim. And what was very interesting, the candidate in Pforzheim, there's a large Russian-German community. He did all of his campaign leaflets, everything in Russian, in Turkish, in all the languages. He went into the communities. He really talked to them. And it's quite incredible how he managed to win in a direct vote the constituency. And I think that's, you know, I want us to do more of that. I think it has been quite successful. And there was an interesting question in chat, Jeff, if you allow me to address that. The was for September. I'm scared really by the amount of fake news already circulating against us, which is so well done. Really, it's so well done. And it's crazy. You know, like we want to forbid all domestic animals, like just craziness, but it's circulating. It's extremely well done. And, you know, we are a bit afraid that we will spend too much of our energy and time in fighting this sort of, you know, fake news propaganda, whatever is coming, and not spend enough time on our positive agenda. But it's just mind-boggling, the amount of really, you know, I'm like, Annalena Baerbock, you know, she has a master's from LSE in London, okay? So she has no German master's, terrible, okay? So she has a German like not a bachelor, but what used to be at the time, the Vordiplom. And then she, daring her, only got a master, you know, only a master's from the London School of Economics. So they made out of like, you know, screenshots that she doesn't have any diploma, that she has not studied, etc. It was just like mind-boggling. I was like, my God, you know, it's a renowned international school. It rather shows her openness to the world. It rather qualifies her for the job than not. But the way it was portrayed in social media was just, I like, you know, so that's what we're really afraid of. And when I know that there was a huge ghostwriter attack now in Germany on members of the Bundestag and of Landtag. And that's exactly the same attacks like on, you know, in the Baltic and the Poland, and we know where they come from, very dangerous. This is what scares me, is the influence from outside China, Russia in these elections, and other parties maybe picking it up. This, I think, is for me difficult. And the price we will pay, of course, I just said it in an interview in the Spiegel this week on record, believing that a more forceful stance on China would be without a cost to German economy is not honest. I said that on record, so I can repeat it here. And what we German Greens want to do is diversify imports and exports. We need to get our German industry to diversify their exports too. And it won't happen tomorrow, but we have to start it. It's a dialogue with our companies, with our big companies, the smaller ones, to diversify. We really need to not completely go, but diversify.
So to me, and I am biased, but I think you sound like a politician, Franziska, with a vision and a strategy and command of details. And we're very excited about that. You all, thank everybody for making time. What I wanted to do, I will not do. I wanted to bring Hannes back in. I wanted to ask Franziska a final question. We're already 2 minutes over time, but every second was worthwhile. I want to thank everybody. Read Hannes, An American Purpose, called The Contender on German Politics Elections in September. Franziska, Godspeed and hope to see you again soon. Thank you for making time.
It was my pleasure. Hope to see you soon in person.
Bye-bye.
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 Thanks, everybody.